Oh, we got something a little special today. I have not one, but two best-selling authors with me, Jeffery Deaver, and Isabella Maldonado. Welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So, okay, this is gonna be a lot of fun. I want to start with you, Jeffery, because you may not remember this, but Author Magazine, we interviewed you a bunch of years ago up in Seattle. And you said something. I've interviewed so many authors, but a couple things you said have stayed with me all these years. One of which, and it was just a little aside, you said, well, I think you were referring to film industry who got interested in your books. You said, I don't play well with others, is what you said. And yet here we are, and coming out very soon will be, there it is, Fatal Intrusion, co-authored with none other than Isabella Maldonado. So, what changed, Jeffery? Why are you playing well with others now?
Sure. Well, the basic premise has not changed. And I won't belabor this because Isabella will want to chime in as well. But I'm very much of a control person. I won't say control freak, but when I envision a novel, I have a very specific idea of what I want it to be. Write the best novel I can for my readers. That applies to short stories too. And in general, with that very focused idea, very clear idea of the kind of twisty-turny thriller that I write, I don't want to show pages to anybody. I know what I'm going to do. I go through 20, 30 revisions, rewrites to do a big outline, then the revisions, and then out it comes. And it goes to the publisher, of course, and they edit the book. Publishers are very important. But having said that, it's a unique set of circumstances by which Isabella and I met and decided to work together. So with that disclaimer, Isabella, do you want to jump in and say how this whole thing got started?
Yeah, fill us in. How did this come to be?
Sure, exactly. Yeah, so Jeff and I met at a conference called Murder and Mayhem in Chicago.
Okay.
Back in 2018, and we were there both together, and we met and got to know each other in the green room with Gillian Flynn was there as well.
Oh, wow.
And the three of us were just riffing and cracking each other up and making a lot of fun jokes. And we just had such a good time. And I also found out that, that Jeff lived at the time in an area where I was from. And we found all these things in common. And I really enjoyed his sense of humor. And then we reconnected a couple of years later at Thriller Fest in New York City.
Oh, yeah.
And we went there, and again, same thing. We just really liked each other and had, our humor is the same. And so at that point, I asked him, I had a new book coming out with a new publisher, and I asked him if he would blurb it, and he agreed to. And so from that, he got to read my writing. And I think at that point, he realized that we write in a very similar style. And I have been compared to him many times.
Oh, very nice.
So once he got to see that, I think then later when we reconnected again at yet another Thriller Fest, and then afterwards we were talking about it, I think that's kind of what made it be like, okay, this can work because we just blend really well.
Well, and let me say a word or two, if I could, about launching from there. We both write in a style that is simpatico with each other. Now, for instance, specifically, a third-person close point of view, and I'm sure you and many of your viewers/listeners will know what that is. Shifting points of view. We include a lot of esoteric detail, but not too much. Interesting facts. The books take place over a very short period of time, as does Fatal Intrusion, a couple of days. Lots of twists and turns, big surprise ending. After that, there's a big surprise ending, another big surprise ending after that. And I don't think either of us could have written with an author who did primarily, let's say, first-person point of view, present tense, introspective, character-driven, nor could we have written with a pantser. And for those of you in the audience out there who don't know what that term refers to, there are two types of writers in the world, the plotters and the pantsers, as in seat of the pants.
Right.
Those are people who sit down with a blank screen or blank piece of paper and just go from there. And that we don't work that way. I don't frankly think that's a very efficient way to write.
Hey, oh, not easy. Fighting words, Jeffrey, careful.
We are.
But if it works, it works. And
there you go.
There's some authors you probably never heard of them: Michael Connelly, George R. Martin, Lee Child. They don't outline. Stephen King. They don't outline. So, and if those guys keep at it, they will be successful
someday.
But it's what the what works. So that was what we realized we had in common, and so it was much easier for us to proceed.
So that is so interesting. I've recently, maybe a year and a half ago, I interviewed a married couple who wrote a novel together during COVID. And the way they wrote it, and I could not believe it, was they sat at the dining room table together and went sentence by sentence together writing it. I mean, one's a poet and one was a novelist. I don't think that's how you wrote it. What I think, and I could be wrong, I think one person wrote one chapter and one person wrote another one. Is that true? I was reading it, trying to kind of game it out. No, forget it. I don't know anything. Okay.
In a way, yeah. So Isabella, you want to jump in?
Yeah. All right. Just give me the lowdown how you did this.
Yes. Well, it started because we both outlined. It started with a brainstorm and then an outline, and then you begin writing. And yeah, we did both grab chapters, like I'll take this one, I'll take that one. And we both did that. But this is why, and a lot of people say they try to figure out who wrote what.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to do that, though, because we traded points of view and we also heavily edited the other's work.
Right.
And so we each went in after the other. And so it's very smooth, and it does seem like a very cohesive story because of that.
Right. We declared when we started this project, no ego zone.
Yeah.
We would, in general, the two characters, we'll talk more about the substance of the book in a moment, I'm sure, but we have two characters. One is an agent with the Department of Homeland Security investigations, and I'll let Isabella talk about that later. Isabella being a former police officer, police captain. And this is an organization I knew nothing about. She may have been somewhat familiar with it, but so we have a woman agent, and then a kind of a geeky, weird guy who is a crank, who's very socially minded. It kind of protects people. He's called an intrusionist, a self-defined term, and he guards people against corporate and government intrusion. And so I wrote maybe the majority at first draft, the majority of the chapters from his point of view, Jay Karen, and Isabella wrote primarily the chapters from Carmen Sanchez's point of view, but we also stepped into each other's characters, or the other character. And then when we began to work, we would just rip the chapters apart if we needed to. There was absolutely no ego involved, and we knew we had to do that to make the book the best we possibly could. And this is not about my ego or her ego. It's about getting a quality thriller, a very tight thriller, into the hands of the readers. And that's why it was a truly collaborative effort.
Well, I'm very impressed, and I love the lack of ego. I mean, it's good for a writer, I think, whether they work alone or in pairs, not to have an ego, but it's probably easier to have one maybe when you're by yourself. As now Jeffrey mentioned, part of the reason I thought maybe you were a bit more divided was because, as Jeffrey said, Isabella, you worked in law enforcement. Jeffrey, you had a background in law. You were a lawyer, a little different than what Isabella was doing. So for 20 years, right? You were boot on the ground or in active law enforcement, right?
Yes, wore a gun and a badge for 22 years.
Okay, so that, there's some writers who come from that background. I've worked with CIA agents and FBI agents, but mostly it's more lawyers than cops, I think, in general. And part of the reason I thought maybe that was more divided was I was reading some chapters. I was like, man, there is a level of verisimilitude here. When I know Jeffrey's a hardworking writer who does his research, but it just feels to me like someone who has been there on a level I just don't know you can get otherwise. Is that fair? At least a little from my observation.
I don't know. You'd be surprised how intuitive Jeff can be.
Oh yeah. All right.
Yeah, because he did write chapters in Agent Sanchez's point of view, and it was really cool. Now, I mean, there's, times I would, tweak a little bit or whatever. I think something that I maybe bring that is a little different. It seems like it's very popular right now to have like a female law enforcement lead character, both television, movies, and books. And I'm one of the few who can say I've done that. I am a female law enforcement officer and have done it for a long time. And to be able to bring that internal perspective of what it's like to show up on the scene and have to try to work in that situation under those circumstances, and how people react to you and how you react to him, or them rather, that's different from a male officer.
I would think. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I've worked with CIA, NRO, NSA, New York City Police, FBI. I have friends I live in Northern Virginia. I have friends and lived in Manhattan for a long time. So I have friends in the community. But you really can't get it's not the same gritty, palm sweaty kind of stuff that Isabella went through. So I have a working knowledge, but then I was always very comfortable in writing the scenes of perhaps conflict or procedure, knowing I could, put basically an ellipses in and know that it can be filled in quite.
Like insert technical stuff here.
Yeah. Deets, the word deets. I didn't actually use that in this book, but you may have heard some authors write deets to follow, as in details to follow.
Right.
And so that certainly added to the credibility of the story.
Isabella, as I alluded to, I could have an entire show devoted to nothing but lawyers who became writers. It is such a, and I think it's partly because lawyers are storytellers by nature. That's what you kind of have to do but far fewer people with your background. And so talk to me about that transition, because it's unusual, I think, to want to in stories about something which was, and I would imagine someone who lived it. And I have had experiences I've seen people write about, and I thought, that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes. That's fine. You're telling a story, but I know I've been there. That's not how it goes. And so people write a lot about crime. And so you had to have been on both sides, read books and lived it, and probably seen stuff you thought was not realistic at all.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the transition.
It starts because, I always loved reading, and especially reading crime fiction, for a long time.
I know. I'm sorry. I have to stop you. You were reading crime fiction while you were an officer, a police officer.
I know.
It's so strange. Okay. All right.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe a doctor would read a medical drama and enjoy it. I don't know.
Okay.
I know. But very few authors, I thought, did an outstanding job of it, but still I enjoyed it. But I read all kinds of things. I don't just read that, and I read anything, but I always like storytelling, and I was always a natural storyteller. My husband and I joke that I come home from the grocery store and I have a whole story about all kinds of things that happen, but he doesn't. He comes home and he's just like, I don't know, I got stuff. It's like, no, something happened. I don't know. You have the mind of a storyteller or you don't. And so after I retired, I wanted to try writing. And so I spent 5 years studying the art and craft of writing. Because it's very different from police writing. And at least police writing, I was going to say, it shouldn't be creative writing. It really shouldn't be fiction. So yeah, and to learn how to really craft it. I mean, I knew a good story when I read it, but to learn, kind of get under the hood and see how it's done, just took a lot of work to do that. And so after that, then I first tried my hand at short stories and got 3 of those published first, then, sort of drilled in how I wanted to do it. And then I finally tried my hand at a novel, and I was very fortunate. I immediately got a 3-book deal instantly. Very, very lucky.
You're a prodigy.
Yeah, well, I know other authors throw rocks at me when I say stuff like that. Literally the very first, publisher immediately offered me a deal.
That's now while you were learning your craft and reading, were you a fan of Mr. Deaver's? It's okay if you weren't. I'm just curious. Were you a fan?
No, absolutely. you have to, and really the Lincoln Rhyme series was the first one that, if you like reading police procedurals and you like reading, crime fiction, those are among the classics. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the two of you walk me through this. So you talked a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts of how once you started writing, but like one of the most important parts of a novel is you got to say, well, what are we doing here? What's the story? What are we going to focus on? Because, you got to look around and find the thing you're interested in. So talk me through how you just agreed on what the story is you're going to tell, because you have to get your idea and start fleshing it out. Right. And that has to be agreed upon. How did that work?
Well, Isabella had the basic idea that became a fatal.
Oh, so it started with her, kind of.
Well, yeah, and it was, and I'm going to be hesitating now because the book is about twists and turns and surprises, multiple surprise reversals inside, surprise endings, a lot of setup, and we have multiple subplots. Which is very important because these books are about emotional engagement, and you need an emotional engagement on the level of the core crime, and that involves an apparent serial killer stalking Southern California. You'll note the key word there, apparent, because if you've read our books, nothing is quite what it seems to be. But then there's what I call with affection the soap opera subplot, and that is the personal relationship subplot that has to do with family issues, friendship issues, and so forth. And then there's not to scare readers off, a geopolitical subplot, and that I can't say anything about at all. But it is a very relevant story nowadays that has twists and turns and emotional ups and downs as well. And you'll, as readers get into the story, they will understand that, they will see it. But we just got on the phone and started talking and started sending memos back and forth and fleshing out that outline that started as, I don't know, a couple of pages, ended up being, 40 pages. We get on the phone and say, no, we can't do this, we have to do that. And then finally we got an outline that was, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 pages long.
50 or 60?
That represented 60 chapters, 50 to 60 chapters that expanded to about 80 chapters when the book was finally done. And then we just started taking, and Isabel will talk about the technical stuff, because even though I've written 4 cyber thrillers, I still didn't know how this worked. And she can explain it for the mechanics of joint writing. But we would then, pick a chapter or work on a chapter simultaneously or offline or whatever. And that's how we proceeded from there.
Okay, so Isabel, so you had an idea for a story. And so you guys said, hey, what if we work together? And you said, I keep picturing the Get Back video and Lennon and McCartney. And I think that's what you two were like. And so you had an idea for a song, so to speak. And so you said, what if we work on this one? Is that kind of how it went, Isabella?
Well, when we first got together and we were talking about writing, it was like we actually decided first that we wanted to write something together. Yeah. So I didn't come in already with this preconceived idea. We each had various ideas of our own that we had never had a chance to develop.
Right.
And so after we knew we wanted to write together, then we got on the phone and we started discussing, each of our different ideas that we had, when, this will work, this won't work, this is good for 2 writers, this isn't, whatever.
Right.
And then we sort of settled on one that I had thought about before, but that was only just the kernel of the idea. I mean, it blossomed into something way more than that,
Right.
And
is the kernel still there? Can you still see the kernel?
A little bit of the kernel, yes, is still there. It's just, but isn't that the way it always is, though? You start with a germ of an idea, and then it just really expands.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's the fun part, I think. I think the expansion is the fun part. And so, all right, so Jeffrey said you had a 60-page outline by the end. Is that right?
Yeah, but it was like a chapter a page, though. So don't.
Yeah, but some of your pages aren't but 2 pages long. Some of your chapters aren't but 2 pages long anyway. I just written the thing. Okay, no, so it was huge. You really went through every chapter pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, I don't understand it, but now when you're well, I do understand it, but now once you said okay, We got our outline. This is it. This is it. And you're an outliner too, right, Isabella?
Yeah.
Okay. Then in the writing, how much changed, if anything, once you actually started putting words to page that were seen?
There was a fair amount.
Yeah.
It's always I found that it's very easy to kill people on the outline, but very hard in the book because
Explain it.
you know, I say that with tongue in cheek and it's joking, but as I tell my students, death is a big deal. Death has consequences, and there's an emotional outpouring that touches many, many lives when there's a death. And you can't have a bad made-for-TV movie. Well, we see bad made-for-TV movies, but we try to avoid that, in which the bad guys are gunned down with machine guns, and they in turn gun down the good guys with machine guns, and there's no emotional engagement there. So what I have tended to do is I tend to kill too many people in the outline, and then when I get into it, I realize that no, you know what? That to do it right, suddenly the book is 800 pages long. Less is more. And then a perfect example, I had a what I call a twist too far at the end of this book. I had an idea that was sort of like, you know, Freddy Krueger, and I can't remember what movie he was from, but Halloween or Friday the 13th, whatever it was. And you know, he's dead, but oh, guess what? He isn't dead.
Yeah, right.
And so he pops up, and you know, is invulnerable, of course. And Isabella had said, and this is an example of our working together, said, you know what, that might detract from the stellar twists up to that point. And she was absolutely right. And that was in the outline, and out it came, and it made a much better book. But then we will, you know, add certain things, and you know, we do most of the research ahead of time, but during the course of writing, ideas come to us, and it's a gestalt kind of thing, and we say, oh, well, let's research that, let's put that in, and so it's you know, kind of a you know, it's kind of like skiing. I don't know if you ever skied, and I used to. I don't much anymore, but you know where the run is, but maybe I'm going to go a little off the run, and maybe I'm going to get out ahead of my skis a little bit. Maybe I'm going to kind of have to be kind of cautious here, or you're holding on for dear life, and that at the end of the day, you end up back at the you know, on vertical at the end of the run.
Well, GM Ford, the suspense writer, said, I was talking to him, he said, well, you got to, his eye outline, but you got to leave room for the magic. You got to leave room for the magic. And I do think, I always felt like that's the case. So Isabella, a little personal question, but you dealt in law enforcement. I'm not sure what exactly the extent of your work, but you may have had to deal with, I'd never had to deal with people dying except old people who are related to me, and so it goes. Such is life. But you may have had to deal with violent death in your career. Was that the case?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the other there was in different ways.
Right.
Sometimes it would be simply, you know, you show up and there is a dead person right there. Other times, when I was young in the beginning of my career, when I was out on patrol, I was one of the few. A lot of times, I was the only female on my squad.
Right.
And I was one of only a few fluent Spanish speakers.
Right.
In the department at the time.
Right.
And so for whatever, I guess they thought they had me doing a lot of death notifications in Spanish.
Oh, lucky you.
I know. I guess they thought people would take it better coming from a woman. I would be, you know, sort of warm and sympathetic and whatever. And it felt really, you know, it was awful. Sometimes I felt like I was like the angel of death. You know, I would show up and everybody would start crying because they'd know why I was there.
Right.
But, you know, so sometimes you deal with the aftermath. Other times you deal with it right there, whether it's a homicide or a suicide or an accident. You know,
Which was harder, after the fact or the body? Was it, I mean, not to get, but this is storytelling. Like, which was the hardest part as a human being?
The hardest thing is the death notifications. I mean, that is just horrific.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing too. And I think it's really important that people understand that, you know, sometimes authors are accused of, like, you know, trivializing or profiting from, you know, death or whatever. It's like, no, I always in my stories try to treat it with that respect of understanding the extreme ramifications that go on, not just in the survivors' lives, but for generations. your whole family and even your community can be affected by one death. And so I do try to respect that.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. So what, look, you're both professionals, but you know, everybody, I remember talking to Alice Hoffman, the novelist. She's published a lot of novels, and she said every time she writes a book, there's at some moment in the middle where she thinks this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work, you know? So was there a difficult part of this book where you both looked at each other and said, what are we doing? Or would you just nose to the grindstone and plow ahead?
The analogy I would make, and again, I harken back to the courses I teach and tell my students, when was the last time you went into CVS or Rite Aid and you looked at the shelf and you saw that they were out of toothpaste and you asked the clerk what happened? And the clerk said, well, you know, Procter & Gamble was not moved by the muse to create toothpaste that month, but we hope they will next month. No, there's no such thing as that. It's there were certainly problems that had to be addressed, but we're in it as professionals to create a product, and it is a product. It's a creative product, but this, you know, there's nothing to be ashamed of there. I mean, Shakespeare wrote, you know, products.
He wrote for the masses.
Well, created products. So Mozart created products. That's, you know, it's a creative product, but nonetheless. And so we just rolled up our sleeves and dealt with the problem, and then moved on.
Is that true, Isabella? Is he putting words in your mouth? Is that how you approach it?
No, it's very, very true. As a matter of fact, something, if anybody, and this is like, it's the first time that either one of us ever co-authored anything, like a novel length of anything. And one of the things we both realized is that we're in the middle of the process. And if anyone else is contemplating doing it, let me say this about it. Obviously, got to find the right person. But once you do, it is so much fun, because usually if I hit a plot problem, and yes, even though you plot ahead and you outline, you still hit plot problems. That doesn't absolve you.
Right.
But when you do, you know, normally I have to sit there and bash my head against a wall all by myself. But this time I have Jeff.
Yeah.
And we brainstorm together. And what's really cool is I will offer suggestions. I'm like, I found this problem. Here's some ideas. And then he would take off from those ideas and come up with even more ideas and better ideas. And then we get, you know, and it comes up and it's like, whoa, I wouldn't have thought of that by myself. It's a synergy that is actually better. It is a gestalt. It is, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely true.
And there weren't some things where you were like, okay, Isabella said, Jeffrey, this is the hill I'm dying on. This person is that we are not changing this. This has got to be this way, or was it?
Oh,
No.
And we were very deferential. And you know, we've done this before. You know, we have books under our belt, so it's not like either of us had to hold the other person's hand. We know what we're doing. It's a pilot, co-pilot. You know, every other flight. The pilot is the co-pilot. Next time he or she will be the pilot, then the co-pilot. That's just the, you know, the administrative thing. And so there was none of that whatsoever.
This is good to hear. It's like, you know, I kind of reminded of my marriage, where I noticed only one of us is allowed to be sad at a time. I don't know why it works that way, but if she's upset, I can't, if I'm upset, I can't, only one of us at a time. So this is good. Well, it sounded like a very enjoyable little journey you two took together in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Fun. A lot of fun. And it has to be fun. Anybody who's considering this, if it ain't fun, don't do it. Writing's hard work. And, you know, you set yourself up for rejection. It's just the nature of the business. And, you know, that's going to happen no matter what, how good the product is. So just make sure you're having a good time during the process.
Do you agree, Isabella? Fun? Are you in for fun?
Absolutely in it for fun. And as a matter of fact, we enjoyed it so much. We are in the process of writing book 2. It is called The Grief Artist. And it is actually,
I like that
isn't
title.
That awesome?
Yeah.
It's up for pre-order. It's already,
what? You too. Yeah. Jesus, do you remember? You got too many books out. There's just too many of them. That is crazy. Wow, you guys are cranking. All right, so there it is. Fatal Intrusion. Look at there they are. Oh, they're looking good. They're looking serious. They're looking good. But I'm not quite done with you. I'm not quite done with you both. All right, I'm going to start with you, Isabella. So you're both going to answer the same question if you could. And it's this. I want you to think about all the writing you've done. And it's taught, if that writing has taught you anything about life, about being a person, it's taught you what?
The writing?
Writing. If writing has taught you something about just life and being human, what has it taught you?
I would say it has taught me that the struggle is worth it.
Yeah, I like it. It is. I have to agree. How about you, Jeffrey? If it's taught you anything, what's it taught you?
Yeah, it has, and you may not like the answer to this, Bill, but it's that it is a more efficient way to get through life by forethought, assessment, planning ahead of time, and you spin your wheels a little bit less.